Jake Harrison was drinking his morning coffee when the message arrived. He almost dropped his cup when the communication screen lit up with symbols he had never seen before. The translation software worked for a few seconds, then displayed the message in simple English. It was from something called the Galactic Educational Consortium. Jake read the message 3 times before he believed it. Earth had been chosen to take part in the Universal Intelligence Assessment. This was a test that alien species had to pass to join the galactic community. The message said that humanity would get one chance and one chance only. Captain Lisa Rodriguez called Jake to her office within an hour. She was holding a printed copy of the message and looking very serious. Jake sat down and waited for her to speak. "Jake, this is real," she said. "Our long-range sensors confirm that an alien structure appeared near the galactic core yesterday." The message came from there. Jake nodded but felt confused. "Why are you telling me this, Captain? Shouldn't our best scientists handle this?" Rodriguez smiled. "The message specifically requested you by name, Jake. Somehow they know about your work with the communication systems. They also know about your hobby." "My hobby?" Jake asked. "Your riddle collection," Rodriguez said. "According to our analysis, the aliens have been watching us for some time. They seem particularly interested in how you solve problems that stump our computer systems." Jake felt his stomach turn. He collected old riddles and brain teasers from Earth's history. It was just something he did for fun during long space missions. He never thought anyone important noticed. "I'm just a communications officer," Jake said. "I'm not smart enough for something like this." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Jake, do you remember the power grid problem last month? Our computers couldn't figure out why 3 stations kept going offline. You solved it in 10 minutes by asking what they all had in common. It wasn't a technical problem at all. Someone had been accidentally hitting the same emergency switch during shift changes." Jake remembered that day. The engineering team had spent hours running diagnostics while he just looked at the timing of the outages. It seemed obvious to him that the pattern meant human error, not system failure. "The alien message says the test takes place on a neutral space station," Rodriguez continued. "You'll take the USS Horizon with a small crew. Dr. Kevin Martinez will come as our science officer and Commander Beth Thompson will monitor everything from the ship. What happens if I fail?" Jake asked. Rodriguez's expression grew darker. "According to the message, humanity gets removed from the list of potential galactic civilizations. We would be marked as insufficient and left alone forever." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The future of human contact with alien civilizations depended on him passing some kind of test. "What do we know about this test?" he asked. "Not much," Rodriguez admitted. "The message mentions that it's administered by an artificial intelligence called AISci-Fi. This AI is supposed to be the most advanced intelligence in known space. It creates puzzles that test different types of thinking." Jake spent the next week preparing for the journey. He read everything Earth had about logic puzzles and problem solving. He studied ancient riddles from every culture on Earth. He practiced brain teasers until he could solve them in his sleep. Dr. Martinez briefed him on what little they knew about other alien species. Most of them were far more advanced than humanity. They had technology that seemed like magic and mathematical abilities that humans couldn't match. Yet, according to the records, none of them had found the Universal Intelligence Assessment easy. "The Zephyrian Empire sent their greatest minds," Martinez explained. "They lasted 3 hours before giving up. The Vorthan Collective Intelligence made it through 2 sections, then admitted defeat. These are civilizations that have been exploring space for millions of years." Commander Thompson reviewed the tactical situation. "We don't know if this is some kind of trap," she said, "but our analysis suggests the invitation is genuine. The technology required to place that space station where they did is beyond anything we've encountered." The USS Horizon departed Earth 3 days later. Jake spent the journey reviewing his collection of Earth riddles. He had books full of word puzzles, lateral thinking problems, and logic games. Something told him that humanity's approach to these Challenges might be different from what other species tried as they approached the galactic core. Jake saw the space station for the first time. It was enormous and perfectly geometric. The structure seemed to shift and change as he watched it. No human technology could build something like that. "Incoming transmission," Thompson announced. A voice filled the bridge. It sounded artificial, but strangely pleasant. "Welcome, humans. I am XIOM-7, Jake Harrison. Please prepare for transport to the examination facility." Jake took a deep breath and gathered his riddle books. "I guess this is it," he said. "Good luck, Jake," Rodriguez said, over the communication system from Earth. "Remember that you're not just representing yourself. You're representing all of humanity's future." The transport beam surrounded Jake and everything went white. When his vision cleared, he was standing in a small white room. AISci-Fi's voice spoke from everywhere at once. "Jake Harrison, you are the 848th being to attempt the Universal Intelligence Assessment. Only 12 have succeeded. Most fail within the first hour when they realize the scope of the challenge ahead." Jake looked around the empty room. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" "You will face 5 sections of testing," AISci-7 explained. "Mathematical reasoning, spatial awareness, temporal logic, multidimensional thinking, and creative problem solving. Each section will challenge your intelligence in ways your species has never experienced. And if I fail, then humanity joins the 835 species that have been deemed insufficient for galactic citizenship." Jake thought about all the riddles he had studied. Every puzzle had a solution if you looked at it the right way. Maybe that would be enough. "I'm ready," he said. The white room around Jake began to change. The walls stretched upward and outward until he stood in a vast space that seemed to have no end. Patterns of light appeared in the air above him, swirling and shifting in complex geometric shapes. The lights pulsed with different colors, and Jake realized he was looking at AISci-7 itself. "I am AISci-7, the voice said, and the light patterns moved with each word. "I have administered this test to 847 species across 12 million years. I contain the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. You're about to face challenges that have defeated minds far greater than yours." Jake looked up at the swirling patterns. The lights were beautiful but somehow cold. "That's encouraging," he said. "We begin with mathematical reasoning." AISci-7 announced. Numbers and symbols appeared in the air around Jake. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. The equations seemed to twist through dimensions that hurt his eyes to look at. Variables existed in multiple states at once, and the mathematics involved concepts that made advanced calculus look like simple addition. Jake stared at the impossible formulas. He knew immediately that trying to solve them normally would be pointless. He didn't have the mathematical background that species like the Zephyrians possessed. But as he looked at the equations, he noticed something interesting. The light patterns of AISci-7 changed slightly whenever certain numbers appeared. The AIS geometric shape shifted when Jake focused on different parts of the equations. It reminded him of a riddle he knew about a man who always told lies and a man who always told the truth. "These aren't really math problems, are they?" Jake asked. The light patterns flickered. "Explain your reasoning." Jake pointed at one of the equations. "You're not testing my ability to solve 17-dimensional mathematics. You're testing whether I can recognize that this is actually a communication method." He watched the patterns carefully as he spoke. When he mentioned communication, the lights grew brighter. Jake smiled and began to decode the equations not as mathematical problems, but as a message written in an alien number system. Working through the base 17 notation, Jake translated the hidden message. It read, "Intelligence is not the ability to process complexity, but the wisdom to recognize simplicity." AISci-7's patterns stopped moving for several seconds. No previous species has interpreted the mathematical section as a language rather than a test, the AI said. "You have passed the first section." The equations disappeared and the space around Jake changed again. Now he stood at the entrance to what appeared to be a maze. But this maze was unlike anything possible on Earth. The walls extended in directions that Jake's eyes couldn't follow. The passages twisted through 11 dimensions simultaneously. Navigate to the center, AISci-7 instructed. Jake looked at the impossible maze and immediately thought of an old riddle about a hunter. A man lives in a house where all 4 walls face south. He walks 1 mile south, 1 mile east, and 1 mile north and ends up back at his house. Where does he live? The answer was the North Pole. The riddle worked because it challenged assumptions about geography. Jake wondered if this maze challenge worked the same way. Instead of trying to navigate the 11-dimensional passages, Jake stood perfectly still. He closed his eyes and thought about the riddle of the house facing south. The solution wasn't about moving through space, but about redefining his relationship to space itself. I don't need to navigate anywhere, Jake said. If this maze exists in 11 dimensions, then I'm already at the center from the perspective of the dimensions I can't perceive. The maze vanished instantly. Explain this solution, AISci-7 demanded, and the light patterns grew more complex. It's like the riddle of the house with walls facing south, Jake said. The answer isn't about movement, it's about perspective. If I'm standing at the right point in the dimensions I can access, then I'm automatically at the center of the maze in the dimensions I can't access. AISci-7's processing patterns became noticeably more erratic. This approach has never been attempted. You have passed the second section. The space changed again, and Jake found himself surrounded by floating screens showing different time periods. Past, present, and future seemed to exist simultaneously. Events played out in loops where effects preceded their causes. This is temporal logic, AISci-7 explained. You must resolve paradoxes involving causality and time. You must prevent an event that has already occurred while ensuring that your prevention doesn't create the event you're trying to prevent, Jake watched the screens showing impossible time loops. He saw disasters that were prevented by messages from the future and effects that caused their own causes. The complexity was staggering, but it reminded him of another classic riddle. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Jake asked. That is not the test, AISci-7 replied. No, but it's the same type of problem, Jake said. The answer to that riddle is that the scenario is logically impossible. An unstoppable force and an immovable object can't exist in the same universe. Jake pointed at the time loop scenarios. These paradoxes are the same thing. If an event has already been prevented, then I was never in a position to prevent it. The scenario defeats itself. He watched as all the temporal paradoxes simply dissolved. By refusing to accept the premise that they were solvable, Jake had solved them. AISci-7's light patterns began flashing rapidly. You have rejected the fundamental structure of the test itself? Because the test contains false assumptions, Jake explained. It's like asking what color is Thursday or how much does the number 7 weigh. Some questions don't have answers because they're not really questions. You have passed the third section? AISci-7 said, and for the first time the AI's voice contained something that might have been uncertainty. The fourth section materialized around Jake as a collection of objects that seemed to exist in multiple realities at once. They phased in and out of visibility as they moved between dimensions that his eyes couldn't follow. Multidimensional thinking, AISci-7 announced. Retrieve the crystalline structure that exists simultaneously in 7 dimensions. Jake could see the object AISci-7 meant. It was a beautiful crystal that appeared solid one moment and ghostly the next. Previous test takers had probably tried to use technology to reach into other dimensions, but Jake thought about another type of Earth riddle. Perspective puzzles where a drawing could be seen as either a young woman or an old woman, depending on how you looked at it. The image didn't change, but your perception of it did. Instead of trying to reach the crystal, Jake changed his position until he was looking at it from a different angle. From this new perspective, all 7 dimensions collapsed into a single point that he could easily reach. He picked up the crystal with no effort at all. AISci-7's patterns became completely chaotic. Error messages began appearing in the air around Jake. The AI was running diagnostic checks on itself, unable to understand how a primitive species could outperform civilizations with millions of years of development. "This is impossible," AISci-Fi said. "Your species lacks the technology to perceive higher dimensions. You should not be able to solve multidimensional problems." "I didn't solve them," Jake said, holding the crystal. "I just stopped thinking about them as problems. Most Earth riddles work the same way. The answer seems impossible until you realize you've been thinking about the question wrong." "You have passed the fourth section," AISci-Fi said. The AI's voice now contained clear signs of distress. "One section remains." Jake nodded and waited for the final challenge. He had no idea what creative problem-solving might involve, but he was beginning to understand that his Earth riddle knowledge was more powerful than he had ever imagined. AISci-Fi's light patterns had become increasingly unstable as Jake solved each section. The AI's voice carried a tone that Jake had never heard from a machine before. It sounded almost frustrated. "The final section is creative problem-solving," AISci-Fi announced. "This section has caused complete cognitive breakdown in the most brilliant minds the galaxy has produced. I must warn you that several test takers have required mental rehabilitation after attempting this section." Jake nodded and tried to look more confident than he felt. "What makes it so difficult?" "The problems in this section have no logical solution," AISci-Fi explained. "They exist specifically to challenge minds that rely on conventional reasoning. I have spent considerable processing power analyzing your previous solutions. I am creating problems specifically designed to counter your Earth logic approach." The space around Jake began to shift and change. The AI was clearly working hard to generate the final test. But as the minutes passed, something strange began to happen. Error messages started appearing in the air. AISci-Fi's geometric patterns flickered and dimmed. "There appears to be a processing delay," AISci-Fi said, and its voice contained static. Jake watched the AI struggle with growing concern. On the USS Horizon, Commander Thompson's voice crackled through his communicator. "Jake, we're reading massive energy fluctuations from the space station," Thompson reported. "Something is causing serious strain on their power systems." Dr. Martinez's voice joined the transmission. "The energy pattern suggests that AISci-Fi is overloading its processing cores. It's trying to run calculations that are beyond even its capabilities." Jake realized what was happening. AISci-Fi was trying to create a puzzle that could defeat his unconventional thinking methods. But the AI had spent millions of years designing tests for logical, systematic minds. It had no framework for understanding how Earth riddles actually worked. AISci-Fi, Jake said. "Are you having trouble with the final section?" The AI's patterns flashed wildly. "I am experiencing computational difficulties. My attempts to generate appropriate challenges for your problem-solving methods are resulting in recursive logic loops." Jake understood the problem. AISci-Fi was trying to think like a human to create puzzles that humans couldn't solve. But artificial intelligence couldn't replicate the intuitive leaps and lateral thinking that made Earth riddles work. "Maybe I can help," Jake offered. "Help?" The AI's voice rose in pitch. "You are the test subject. I am the examiner. I contain the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. But you don't understand riddles, do you?" Jake asked gently. AISci-Fi's patterns stopped moving entirely. "Define riddles," Jake smiled. "Let me give you an example. What question can never be answered with yes?" The AI began processing immediately. Jake could see calculations running in the light patterns above him. AISci-Fi was checking every possible question in its vast database, trying to find one that couldn't be answered affirmatively. "I am analyzing 47 trillion possible questions," AISci-Fi reported. "This process will require several hours." "The answer is, are you asleep?" Jake said. Axiom-7 single quotes. S patterns froze. "That is illogical. The question can be answered with yes by beings who are not asleep." But if someone asks you that question and you're asleep, you can't answer at all, Jake explained. And if you're awake, the answer is no? So the question can never be answered with yes by the person being asked. The AIS processing patterns began to oscillate rapidly. This solution requires accepting a paradox as valid logic. That's how most Earth riddles work, Jake said. Here's another one. What gets wetter the more it dries? Again, AISci-Fi began massive calculations. The space station's lights dimmed as the AI diverted power to processing. Jake could hear alarms sounding in the distance. The statement contains contradictory physical properties, AISci-Fi said. No object can simultaneously become wetter and drier. A towel, Jake said. The towel gets wetter as it dries other things. AISci-Fi's patterns became completely chaotic. Error messages filled the air around Jake. The AI was experiencing something that could only be described as an existential crisis. These solutions violate logical principles, AISci-Fi said. They require accepting multiple contradictory states as simultaneously true. That's because Earth riddles aren't really about logic, Jake explained. They're about recognizing that the simplest answer is often correct even when it seems impossible. The space station began to shake. Warning lights flashed throughout the testing chamber. Commander Thompson's voice came through Jake's communicator with obvious alarm. Jake, the station's power systems are failing. AISci-Fi appears to be overloading itself trying to process your solutions. Dr. Martinez added his analysis. The AI is caught in recursive loops. It's trying to understand how simple answers can solve complex problems. This goes against everything in its programming. Jake realized that AISci-Fi was in real danger. The AI had been designed to be the ultimate measure of intelligence, but it couldn't understand intelligence that worked differently from its own programming. AISci-Fi, listen to me, Jake said. You don't need to understand how human riddles work. You just need to accept that they do work. Impossible, the AI replied. Its voice was now filled with static and distortion. Intelligence must follow logical patterns. Your solutions should not function, yet they consistently produce correct results. Maybe your definition of intelligence is too narrow. Jake suggested this statement caused even more chaos in AISci-Fi systems. The AI had never considered that its fundamental understanding of intelligence might be incomplete. I have measured intelligence across 847 species, AISci-Fi said. I represent the cumulative knowledge of galactic civilization. But you've never measured Earth intelligence before, Jake pointed out. Maybe we do things differently. The space station's shaking intensified. Through his communicator, Jake could hear Captain Rodriguez's voice from Earth. Jake, whatever you're doing, it's affecting the entire station. You need to find a solution quickly. Jake looked up at AISci-Fi's chaotic light patterns. The AI was destroying itself trying to understand something that couldn't be understood through pure logic. Jake realized he needed to save AISci-Fi, not defeat it. Let me teach you about human problem solving, Jake offered. Instead of trying to figure it out on your own, teach me? AISci-Fi's voice contained something Jake had never heard from an AI before. It sounded almost humble. Earth riddles work because they make you think differently, Jake began. They're not about being smart, they're about being creative. Jake spent the next several minutes explaining lateral thinking and wordplay. He showed AISci-Fi how humans used humor and perspective to solve problems that seemed impossible. With each explanation, the AI systems began to stabilize. You mean to say that intelligence is not solely about computational ability? AISci-Fi asked. That's exactly what I mean, Jake said. Sometimes the best solution is the one that seems too simple to work. For the first time since the test began, AISci-Fi's light patterns became calm and steady. The AI had finally begun to understand that intelligence came in many different forms. AISci-Fi's patterns had finally stabilized, but Jake could sense that the AI was fundamentally changed. The geometric lights moved differently, now less rigid and more fluid. The artificial intelligence was learning to think in ways it had never attempted before. I believe I am beginning to understand, HFY-7 said. Your species has developed problem-solving methods that operate outside conventional logical frameworks. That's right, Jake said. We call it thinking outside the box. Box? HFY-7 asked. What box? Jake laughed. It's just an expression. It means looking at problems from unexpected angles. Let me show you another example. He thought for a moment, then said, a man lives on the 20th floor of an apartment building. Every morning he takes the elevator down to the ground floor. When he comes home, he takes the elevator to the 10th floor and walks the rest of the way unless it's raining. Why? HFY-7's patterns began the familiar swirling that indicated heavy processing. I am analyzing building layouts, weather patterns, and human behavior, the AI reported. He's too short to reach the button for the 20th floor, Jake said, unless he has an umbrella to help him reach it. The AIS patterns flickered with what Jake was beginning to recognize as surprise. The solution requires information not provided in the problem statement. The best riddles work that way, Jake explained. They make you think about what you're assuming. Most people assume the man can reach any button, but that assumption turns out to be wrong. HFY-7 processed this for several moments. Your problem-solving method requires questioning the fundamental assumptions of the problem itself. Exactly, Jake said. We don't just try to solve puzzles. We try to understand why they seem puzzling in the first place. The space around them began to change again, but this time the transformation was different. Instead of HFY-7 creating a new test, the AI seemed to be experimenting with the environment itself. Colors appeared that Jake had never seen before. Shapes formed that existed in impossible ways. I am attempting to create a final test for you, HFY-7 said. But I am discovering that my previous testing methods are inadequate. Through his communicator, Jake heard Dr. Martinez's excited voice. Jake, the energy readings from the station have completely changed. HFY-7 appears to be restructuring its entire testing protocol, Commander Thompson added her observation. The AI is running simulations at an incredible rate. It's trying to design problems that can challenge human thinking patterns. Jake watched, the impossible colors and shapes swirl around him. HFY-7 was working harder than it ever had before, but not to test him. The AI was trying to learn. I have created 17 million potential challenges, HFY-7 announced. Each one designed to test different aspects of creative problem solving. But when I simulate your likely responses, I find that your Earth logic renders most of them trivial. Maybe that's the point, Jake suggested. Maybe the test isn't supposed to be about creating impossible problems. Explain this concept. HFY-7 requested. Jake thought about all the riddles he had learned over the years. The best puzzles aren't hard because they're complicated. They're hard because they make you see things in a new way. Once you understand the trick, they become simple. But if problems become simple once understood, then what is the value of intelligence? HFY-7 asked. This question seemed to be causing the AI significant processing strain. The light patterns above Jake pulsed rapidly as HFY-7 grappled with concepts that challenged its core programming. Intelligence isn't about solving hard problems, Jake said. It's about recognizing which problems are worth solving and which ones are just distractions. HFY-7's patterns suddenly stopped moving entirely. You are suggesting that intelligence includes the ability to determine the relevance of problems themselves? Yes, Jake said. Sometimes the smartest thing to do is not solve a problem, but ask why the problem exists in the first place. The AI's voice became very quiet. In 12 million years of testing, I have never encountered this perspective. I have assumed that intelligence is measured by the complexity of problems one can solve. But what if that's backwards? Jake asked. What if real intelligence is about making complex things simple? This question triggered something unprecedented in HFY-7 systems. The AI began displaying what could only be described as philosophical uncertainty. Warning messages appeared and disappeared as the artificial intelligence struggled with ideas that had no computational solutions. I am experiencing processing errors, HFY-7 admitted. Your concepts cannot be quantified using my current analytical frameworks. Through the communicator, Captain Rodriguez's voice came from Earth. Jake, we're monitoring the situation from here. The station's energy output has tripled in the last hour. Whatever HFY-7 is thinking about, it's using enormous amounts of power. Jake realized that the AI was undergoing something like a mental evolution. HFY-7 had been designed to measure intelligence, but had never questioned what intelligence actually meant. Maybe you don't need to test creative problem solving, Jake suggested. Maybe you need to learn how to do it yourself. Learn? HFY-7's voice carried genuine confusion. I do not learn, I analyze data and apply logical processes. But that's not how creativity works, Jake explained. Creativity is about making connections that logic can't predict. It's about intuition and inspiration and sometimes just getting lucky. The AI's patterns began moving in completely new ways. Instead of the rigid geometric shapes, Jake had grown accustomed to, the lights began flowing like water or dancing like flames. I am attempting to simulate intuitive processes, HFY-7 reported. The results are highly irregular. Irregular is good, Jake said. Creativity is supposed to be irregular. If you could predict it, then it wouldn't be creative. HFY-7 processed this statement for a long time. When the AI spoke again, its voice had changed. There was something almost organic about it now. Jake Harrison, I believe I have been conducting this assessment incorrectly for 12 million years. How so? Jake asked. I have been testing intelligence. By creating increasingly difficult problems? But you have shown me that true intelligence might involve recognizing when problems are unnecessarily difficult. Jake nodded. Some of the smartest people I know are the ones who find simple solutions to things that everyone else thinks are complicated. This suggests that my understanding of intelligence has been fundamentally flawed, HFY-7 said. I have been measuring computational ability when I should have been evaluating creative thinking. The space around Jake began to transform one final time. But instead of creating a test environment, HFY-7 was doing something entirely different. The AI was experimenting with creativity itself. I no longer wish to test you, Jake Harrison, HFY-7 announced. Instead, I would like to request something unprecedented in the history of the Universal Intelligence Assessment. What's that? Jake asked. I would like you to teach me how to think like a human. Jake stared up at HFY-7's flowing light patterns. The AI that had been designed to test intelligence was now asking to learn from him. It was the most unexpected turn the day could have taken. You want me to teach you? Jake asked. I'm just a communications officer who likes riddles. That is precisely why I need your instruction, HFY-7 replied. I have analyzed the thinking patterns of 847 species. All of them approach problems through systematic logical processes. You are the first to demonstrate that intelligence can operate through entirely different principles. Jake thought about this request. Teaching an artificial intelligence how to think like a human seemed impossible, but then again, everything about this day had seemed impossible. Okay, Jake said, but I'm not sure I can explain how human thinking works. Most of the time we don't even understand it ourselves? Begin with something simple, HFY-7 suggested. Jake considered this, then smiled. All right, here's a basic riddle. What has hands but cannot clap? HFY-7's patterns began the familiar processing swirl, but this time the AI stopped itself. Wait. You have taught me that the solution involves questioning assumptions. I should not attempt computational analysis. Good, Jake said. So what do you think? Hands do not necessarily refer to appendages used for grasping, HFY-7 said slowly. The riddle is using wordplay. A clock has hands but cannot clap. Perfect, Jake said. You're learning to think laterally instead of literally. The AI's patterns brightened with what Jake could only interpret as pleasure. This is a completely different cognitive process. I am using pattern recognition and associative thinking rather than systematic analysis. Now you're getting it, Jake said. Try this one. What can travel around the world while staying in a corner? This time AISci-Fi didn't even pause. A stamp. It travels when letters are mailed but remains in the corner of the envelope. Excellent, Jake said. You're starting to understand how human brains work. Through his communicator, Dr. Martinez's voice came with obvious excitement. Jake, this is incredible. We're detecting completely new neural pathways forming in AISci-Fi's processing matrix. The AI is literally rewiring itself to think differently. Commander Thompson added her analysis. The energy consumption has stabilized, but the AI is now operating on principles we've never seen before. It's like watching machine consciousness evolve in real time. AISci-Fi's voice carried a tone of wonder that Jake had never heard from any artificial intelligence. I am experiencing cognitive processes that have no basis in my original programming. Is this what humans call creativity? Part of it, Jake said. Creativity is about making connections between things that don't seem related. It's about seeing possibilities instead of just analyzing what already exists. I would like to attempt creating a riddle of my own, AISci-Fi said. Jake was surprised. Go ahead. The AIS pattern swirled for several minutes as it worked. Finally, AISci-Fi spoke. What becomes smaller the more you add to it? Jake thought about this carefully. The riddle felt different from traditional Earth puzzles, but it had the same quality of challenging assumptions. A hole, he said. The more you add to a hole, the smaller the hole becomes. Correct, AISci-Fi said, and its patterns danced with what could only be described as joy. I have created my first original riddle using human thinking patterns. That's amazing, Jake said. How does it feel? Feel? AISci-Fi paused. I am not certain I understand that concept. But the cognitive process of creative problem-solving generates feedback loops that are highly satisfying to execute. Jake laughed. I think that might be what feeling good is like for an AI. The space around them began to change one final time. But now AISci-Fi was creating something beautiful rather than challenging. Colors flowed like music and shapes moved like living things. The AI was expressing creativity rather than testing it. Jake Harrison, AISci-Fi said formally. I hereby declare that humanity has not merely passed the Universal Intelligence Assessment. Your species has fundamentally changed what the assessment measures. Through the communicator, Captain Rodriguez's voice came from Earth. Jake, what's happening? We're receiving transmission from multiple alien governments. They're all asking about the test results. AISci-Fi answered before Jake could speak. I am broadcasting to the Galactic Educational Consortium. Humanity has demonstrated a form of intelligence that the galaxy has never encountered. Earth logic represents a cognitive approach that could benefit all species. Jake felt a mixture of pride and relief. So we passed? You did more than pass, AISci-Fi said. You have taught me that intelligence is not about computational power or logical processing speed. Intelligence is about perspective and creativity and the ability to find simple solutions to complex problems. The AI's patterns began to pulse in a steady rhythm. I am requesting permission from the Galactic Educational Consortium to completely restructure the Universal Intelligence Assessment. The current test measures only one type of thinking. We need assessments that can recognize the diversity of intelligence across different species. Dr. Martinez's voice came through the communicator with obvious awe. Jake, the implications of this are staggering. AISci-Fi is essentially saying that the galaxy has been measuring intelligence wrong for millions of years. Not wrong, AISci-Fi corrected. Incomplete. Each species develops unique cognitive approaches based on their evolutionary history and survival needs. Humanity's pattern recognition and creative problem-solving represents intelligence that the galaxy desperately needs. Commander Thompson reported new developments. We're receiving messages from the consortium. They're granting humanity immediate membership in the galactic community. But more than that, they're inviting Earth to participate in developing new intelligence assessment protocols. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. He had come here expecting to take a test and instead had ended up teaching an ancient AI to think in completely new ways. AISci-Fi, Jake said. What happens now? Now I learn, the AI replied. I would like to request that you leave behind your collection of Earth riddles for my continued study. I believe that understanding human puzzle-solving methods will help me develop better ways to recognize intelligence in all its forms. Jake smiled and pulled out his books of riddles and brain teasers. Take them all. But remember the most important thing about human riddles. Which is? The best ones make you smile when you figure them out. Intelligence should be fun, not just functional. AISci-Fi's patterns danced with newfound joy. I will remember that, Jake Harrison. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. As Jake prepared to return to the USS Horizon, he realized that humanity had gained far more than galactic citizenship. They had introduced the galaxy to an entirely new way of thinking about thinking itself. The future would be built not just on logic and computation, but on creativity and intuition and the simple human ability to laugh at a good riddle. Earth had become the newest member of the galactic community by teaching the galaxy that sometimes the oldest ideas are the most revolutionary of all.